delivering an obscure Cinderella. So in this version, Cinderella 2000, which is what we'll call it, because it was made in the year 2000. So this Cinderella takes place in a very fashion-forward town, somewhere on the cliffs by the sea. It has a 1950s vibe and a small village vibe. The whole thing begins with a procession, and we see a beautiful Rolls Royce roll up to the castle, and we hear beautiful music, very 1950s rock and roll, as the queen and the prince come on in, and the queen is telling the prince, "It's time, honey, you gotta find yourself a wife." Then we meet our Cinderella, who also has a name, and it is out there. Her name is Zezola. I always heard Isola, which is also easier to pronounce. Zezola. She's a lovely young miss. She's walking by the sea. She's walking along the cliffs. Then she's going to her mother's grave. So, mother dead. Check. She has a connection with nature. She says hello to a sheep named Beatrice. So, friends with animals. Check. Connection to nature. Check. Check. And then when she goes home, she meets the only servant in the house. His name is Phelim. Now, Phelim is the butler, the cook, the coal shoveler. That's when we meet him. He's shoveling coal. This is not a house run on electricity. And even though it's a huge estate, the fact there's only one servant is telling us they're not exactly in the money right now. So at the start, we met the queen and the prince. We also meet the stepmother and her two daughters, and she's down on her luck. She is trying to get in, but the guards won't let her pass. And she shows she's a duplicitous woman by trying to sneak in. She's like, "Oh, we didn't get our invitation." And the guard is like, "Well, you ain't never gonna get your invitation." The next thing we hear, Zezola has a message from father saying he has a surprise. And what do we think that surprise is? He's remarried and he's bringing home Kathleen Turner, our fabulous stepmother, and the two stepdaughters, Regan and Goneril. Now, if you're not a Shakespeare nerd, allow me to shed some light. Regan and Goneril are the names of the two daughters in King Lear, who proved to be rather duplicitous when it comes to loving their father. They shower him with praise to get their part of the kingdom, and then when King Lear is down on his luck, they abandon him. Sort of a hint of where this is going. So, Zezola meets them at the train station. Surprise, you got a new stepmother, you got some new stepsisters. Her father actually goes, "You needed a mother." Meanwhile, this bitch is like 20. So, with the father, who is alive, there's conflict because he's doing whatever it takes to please the stepmother and the stepdaughters at the cost of his daughter, his own flesh and blood. They take over her room. The mother convinces him it would be kind of her to make them feel at home by moving to the attic. And he's like, "Yeah, you know what? She's right. Move to the attic." Then they have this huge feast, and Zezola comments on it. She's like, "We could never afford wine before. How can we afford it now?" So all of this money has come from somewhere, but where? Then we have the starvation of Zezola, where now they refuse to feed her because they're like, "Well, if you're too good for our food," which is not what she said, "if you're too good for our food, then you won't eat at all." The mother taunts Phelim, the manservant, because it's not warm enough in the house. Go shovel more coal. And he passes out from shoveling coal because the man's like 80. Okay, maybe he's only 60. Still, he's not exactly a prime young buck, okay? And Zezola finds him passed out, so she's shoveling coal. So guess who's covered in cinders? Now, the two stepsisters are very sultry and seductive. They lounge around the house in their lingerie, and they're drinking and smoking, and they laugh over the idea of corrupting Cinderella, who they now have bequeathed. Even her father goes by the nickname now. So now the father's going on a trip, and he goes, "Come, stepdaughters, sit beside me, tell me how much you love me, and I will get you whatever you want." And they run over and, "Oh, father, you're so wise," and, "Oh, father, I've learned so much from you." One asks for a diamond necklace, the other one asks for a gold and emerald ring. And Zozola comes downstairs, and she doesn't please him enough. Again, very King Lear. She says, I only love you as much as a daughter should, no more, no less. And he does not like that. And then she asks for the branch. Check. So, father has gone away, and the stepmother is like, I don't like idle people, get to work. And she puts her to work, and now Cinderella is a servant in the house. Check. When the father comes back, oh ho ho, there is a fallout between him and the stepmother, Claudette, because she learns, despite his noble title and his beautiful home, he is broke. He couldn't mortgage or entail his property. So she's like, well, if there's no cash, there's no relationship between you or I. And this is when he pulls out an invitation to the ball. You see, he is a noble and they must attend. But though she accepts the invitation, she does not accept the father back into her bed. And now there's conflict between him and the stepmother and him and Cinderella. Cinderella is constantly like, Father, I'm cleaning the floors. You want to do something about this? He's emotionally, mentally, and spiritually weak. He will not stand up for his daughter. He will not stand up for himself. He is bending to the will of this woman that he brought into his home. Now the daughters are being primed by the stepmother. She talks about the shoes. The harder to walk in, the better. She ticks off the list of all the things they must do to snare a husband. This is where the caution of don't trust a woman, they're only going to marry you for their money comes in. These women are living up to that standard. That's exactly what they're aiming to do. Meanwhile, our Cinderella has planted the branch over the grave, and boy, it is growing, and it is growing fast. It's a rose bush now, and a hawk has landed on the grave, and she sees the hawk and she has this vision of a woman. And then one day, while weeping about how hungry she is, the hawk flies off and she follows her. We don't know the gender of the bird. She follows the hawk to a cave. Now we enter a watery cavern along the shores, and we come to a waterfall. The hawk flies in and the waterfall parts like a curtain. This is interesting because, again, connection to nature, connection to nature, connection to nature. But we saw earlier a scene where she's talking to the wind. Our Cinderella has elemental abilities, and now she's able to pass through the waterfall like a curtain. She's a little magical. And now we meet Mab. Mab is our mermaid, although we don't see a tail. But she lives in the caves. She swims, and she doesn't like people. She doesn't really like our Cinderella that much, but she helps her. She invites her in. She says, if you're hungry, check the bottom of the lake. The bottom of the lake. And at the bottom of the lake is a feast. So, leaps of faith. Check. Our Cinderella goes down to the bottom of the lake. She's able to breathe and eat. It's an enchanted lake. So we have a whole bunch of legends here. One, Mab is Queen of the Fairies. She's mentioned in Shakespeare, so this is another nod to Shakespeare. But she's also a part of British lore. Although reading up on it, apparently her role was taken over by Titania. Whoops. But yeah, so Mab is Queen of the Fairies, and in this case, she's the name of our mermaid magic woman, fairy godmother. So we have the magic, we have the fairy godmother instead of the spirit of the mother, although she does cry at the grave of her mother. She does weep a tree into growth. It grows really fast. And of course, we have a ball coming. So the stepmother cried to the stepsisters that she didn't know that the husband wasn't rich, and what are we going to do? I'll tell you what they're going to do. They're going to start poisoning him. And she has the stepdaughters bringing potions to drink for his health, but of course they're slowly poisoning him. And Zozola catches wind of this because she hears the stepsisters talk about their next stepfather. Does not bode well for the dad. So now the ball comes around, and the father is determined to go, but he is sick from being poisoned chronically. And he is still trying to win the favor of the stepmother, but they just poison him again. before the ball. Now, our Cinderella starts sassing the stepmother, and she does not like that. That's right, this Cinderella's a little spicy. She starts sassing the stepmother, and the stepmother says, follow her, I want to know where she's going. So the stepsisters follow her to the cave where she goes to feast. However, remember, our Cinderella in this version is magical, and the stepsisters are not. So when she passes through that curtain, they can't find her. She disappears, and the stepsisters end up falling in the water, and they catch a cold before the ball. That's karma. The night of the ball, they poison the stepfather again, even though he tries to go with them. Remember, the stepmother's like, I'm looking for another husband, because I gotta get rid of you. So you cannot come. And this is where Zozola finds the poison and runs to the mermaid. She's like, I need help. How can you help me? She knows the mermaid can help her because Phelan, the manservant, friend, only other companion in the house, knows who she is. And in fact, reveals that he is married to her. But it was too hard to be in a relationship because she's antisocial and a mermaid, and he was a man who only wanted to bathe once a week. Ugh. Ladies and gentlemen, hygiene is so important in matters of love. It will help you out. So she goes back to Mab, says, I need your help. I need to stop my stepmother. Mab is reluctant at first. She's like, do I look like I can help you? But of course she can. And here it comes, the dress. It's gorgeous. It's this cerulean blue. It's gorgeous. It's lush. She's weaving her a necklace, also lush and potently blue. Now Cinderella looks like a mermaid with her hair all wild and free. And here comes the next leap of faith, in which our Cinderella must literally climb to a little cliff and jump into a lake, which becomes the portal. And then there's a cute little pumpkin and carriage scene. Well, it's not a scene. There's a little visual of a carriage and two horses after she jumps in. Just in time to hear Mab say, come back before midnight. So she jumps into the lake and pops out on the other side. And on the other side, she's emerged from the fountain and she's at the palace. However, there was a flaw in the plan. You see, Mab, the mermaid, didn't have shoes for her because she's a mermaid. So she doesn't have shoes. But this is a fashion empire, so she's not allowed in. You see all of the women parading and the cameras focusing on their feet, on their shoes. When barefoot Cinderella comes up, the guards cross their weapons and deny her access. Oh no! So, the shoes. Cinderella sits by the fountain under a rose bush, and if you recall, the rose bush is what she planted over her mother's grave. So, she talks about how she's come to the place where mother and father fell in love, but she can't get past the gate without shoes. And the roses rain petals down upon her feet. And now she has rose petal slippers. They're beautiful. These purpley pink rose petal slippers are now on her feet. And she walks up and she's allowed into the ball. Now we meet our prince, who we have seen sparingly throughout the film. He is very immature. He does not want to go to the ball. He does not want to dance. He does not even seem that interested in girls, women. A partner. He's with his friends. They're being very immature and playing with the ball. The queen has to come upstairs and be like, you're nobles. You must go downstairs and play your part. So he goes to the ball. The first person he sees is Goneril, and so he's like, come dance with me, hottie. She's like, yeah, achoo. Yeah, achoo. I have a little cold. Achoo. Now, Cinderella arrives, and she's not interested in dancing with the prince. She didn't come to this ball to dance with the prince. She came to this ball to stop her stepmother from attracting another man. So what she does is interrupt every flirtation that the stepmother is having and asks them to dance. And everyone at the ball is like, boy, she only seems interested in dancing with older gentlemen. I wonder why. And the prince is like, why doesn't she notice me? I'm gonna go cut in. And just as our Cinderella is stealing another older gent from the stepmother, the prince is like, may I have this dance? And our Cinderella is like, no. And she goes off And the prince is like, she said no to me, now I want her more. Okay, tale as old as time. I can't have it, now I want it. So, the prince is sulking the entire time because she's only talking to the older men that the stepmother is trying to seduce. And one of his castle guards, manservants, who knows what the role is, one of the castle people is like, well, what do you do best, Prince? And Prince is like, I sing. And oh my gosh, he sings the best song. You guys have to see it. Link to this version is down below. It is like this big band, jazzy funk, rock and roll solo when he whips out his guitar song. You have to check it out. It's amazing. Like, this is really happening. This is really happening? This is really happening. And so then he jumps into the crowd and body surfs his way to Zizola, snatches her hand and runs out of the room. And now they're alone and they're in the throne room. Sovereignty check. They're in the throne room. And this is, again, our Cinderella is magical. Every time she moves and sways, you can hear the sound of bells. And he's just thoroughly besotted with her. And she's just like, so what do you do? What are your interests? And he's like, I don't really have interests. I just stay in the castle. Our prince is not a man. He's old enough to become a man, but like, he's very childlike. And he's very pure, virginal even, because he asks to kiss her. And she says she's never been kissed. And he says, I've never been kissed either. So this is a type of prince that does not get represented often. It's quite refreshing, honestly. Minus the petulance. But, you know, take what you got. Write your own version if you don't like it. I will. At the strike of midnight, just when they're about to kiss. Oh no, the bell's going off and she must run away. So she disappears. She heads back home. A shoe is left behind, and now our prince has his quest. So he's taking this purple pink petal slipper around the town, which is interesting because it's a soft slipper, but somehow people still can't seem to fit it. Oh, our prince also rides a motorcycle, so that's fun. This small village with motorcycles going through it. And by the time he reaches the home of our protagonists, oh my, well. Now our Claudette, the stepmother, is very clever, and she's like, oh, it's so much pressure. Will you leave the room while my daughters try on your shoe? There will be tears for the one it doesn't fit. And the prince has a very loving mother. So he's fooled. He's like, she must be a very loving mother. He leaves, and she's like, I'll send you refreshments. And the girls are trying to slip their shoes off and put their feet into the slipper, and of course it doesn't fit because their feet are too big, and these petal shoes are only meant for our Zizola, who brings the prince refreshments, and he doesn't even look up, he doesn't even look at her, he's just like, what's taking so long? So we cut back to the stepsisters and the stepmother, who has pulled out a bone saw. And she's like, well, there's nothing for it. Something's gonna have to go. And that's when the prince walks in. And he's like, what are you doing, you mad woman? So, our stepsisters almost lose their feet. Check to the original tale. Almost. Half a check. Half a check. These stepsisters were saved from criminal mutilation of the feet. Now everyone goes off. He's like, that was all of them. What should I do? And he sees the hawk. He sees the hawk, and so he follows. He follows the hawk, and the hawk brings him to Mab. He goes to the cave. So now the prince meets Mab, which is something we've never seen. No prince has ever interacted with the fairy godmother or the enchantress right off. Maybe in sequels, but this is not a sequel. This is the tale. So he meets with her, and he asks about the beautiful girl, and oh, I love her, but I can't find her. And so our mermaid is like, really, you love her, but you don't know who she is. How refreshing to find a prince who has a chance to have his own fairy godmother moment, right? So she gives him a little bit of advice. Are you sure And the prince is like, whoa, the woman who served me refreshments, she's a girl. So he goes back and they find her and she's shoveling coal, covered in ash. Ashen putol, Cinderella. The stepmother again pulls some strings and she's like, this is a big moment. She should be clean. Let's wash her up before you do the do. And they do. They wash her up and they like, she's tight lacing her into this dress and threatening her. If you try on that slipper and it fits and you marry that prince, I will kill your father. So now our Cinderella has a conflict that traditionally she doesn't have. This is normally her escape route. After our Cinderella comes home from the ball, she tells her friend Phelim all about it and she gives him the other slipper. She's like, hold on to this, because you know if the stepmother finds it, it's gonna go bad for me. Now she's being threatened. Now our Cinderella has to stall. She sits here. No, I'll sit here. No, I don't want to try on that shoe. No, I don't even want to look at you. And now she's asking him questions, good questions, sassing our prince, because remember, he's still petulant. He's like, I don't have time for talking. And she's like, you don't have time for talking, but you want to marry me? That doesn't sound like a partner I want. And he's like, what? I didn't even think about that. So our Cinderella is making excellent talking points. What do you plan on doing with your life? I don't plan on being an idle wife. Do you have goals? I need someone I can have conversations with. That type of thing. It's a great scene. Finally, he gives a little impassioned speech and he brings her the slipper. And she rips it up. She tears it apart. She destroys it. Also something we've never seen before. Luckily, upstairs, Phelim has found the father who's bound and gagged to a bed. Oh boy, what a scene that is. And he's helping the father downstairs just as all the commotion breaks out, and he pulls out the other slipper, which of course proves that our Zozola is our Cinderella, the only one who would possibly possess this other shoe. And the stepsisters and the stepmother are all caught in their lie. The stepsisters have gone to chop down the tree. So these were very destructive women. They were destroying her home, her family, her relationships, her father. So there's all that abuse that we classically see in a Cinderella tale. There's always something off. We aren't meant to live this way. We aren't meant to treat each other like this. That's how you know you're in a bad relationship. Luckily, it all works out in the end. Phelim goes back to Mab the mermaid, and they're like, let's try again, romance. I know I mentioned he's an older man, so who knows how long ago they got married, because our mermaid is no spring chicken either. She's beautiful, but she's an older woman. There is a wedding at the castle. The father apologizes to the queen, and the queen is like, oh, you do not need to apologize to me. You need to apologize to your daughter. Amazing queen. They get married. Practical Cinderella's like, a motorcycle brigade, we'll just walk. Okay, girl, just get on the motorcycle. You don't have to walk everywhere anymore. It's gonna be a little far. Whatever, she and the prince have their happily ever after, and this concludes with guards escorting the stepmother and the stepsister, presumably to jail. They're all walking and they're poor again, so the karma and the comeuppance has been served. And this Cinderella was so hard to find. So, like, I'm so glad it's on YouTube now, because for like 15 years, I thought I hallucinated this version. I just saw it on TV one day. But luckily, now you too can watch this version of Cinderella. The link is included down below. I highly recommend you check it out. Remember, it was the year 2000. The computer graphics are silly, but they're kind of cool. They're just very 2000s. It is a bonkers version that not enough people know about. But now you do. Oh, maybe you did know about this one. I don't know. Tell me in the comment section down below. Here's a fun fact. One of the stepsisters is played by Lucy Punch, who is like a professional stepsister because she played stepsister in Into the Woods, this version, and Ella Enchanted, which we will of course get around talking to eventually. but you guys voted obscure. Some of you voted musicals, so next week I have an obscure musical for you, and I'm really excited to share it. It is among my favorites. Thank you so much for joining me. I have been your host, Danielle Marivette Hernandez, here in the woods, talking Cinderella Circle, looking at all of the patterns that this story follows and observing where we can get creative. What do you have to keep it a Cinderella tale versus what can you change to make it your own? What fun we have. Till next time. Hey, thanks for joining me in the woods today.